These are live images of a rally happening now outside of the federal courthouse in St. Paul. A group is protesting the Fed's decision to charge 15 people today who they say impeded federal agents during Operation Metro Surge. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We are digging deeper into those allegations. A dozen of those charged just appeared in federal court after Homeland Security arrested them this afternoon. 2 more people are still at large. Another person was already in custody on different charges. The U.S. Attorney says all of them are from the Twin Cities. We have team coverage of this for you today. We want to begin with Adam Duxter, who was in the courtroom this afternoon. Adam?
Yeah, Frank, you saw that protest happening behind us from the sky, and now you can hear it. It's been going on for hours here outside the federal courthouse in St. Paul. Just hours ago, we saw non-lethal or less lethal munitions used against this group, both tear gas and pepper spray. But now you hear these crowds chanting as one by one those defendants get released back into the public. Now, for the indictment itself, it's one of the largest I've ever seen, Frank. Nearly 100 pages in length, spanning the course of nearly 5 months' time, starting in January when Operation Metro Surge was in its infancy here in the Twin Cities. The indictment itself says this group of just over a dozen conspired to impede or injure, that's the words they're using, federal agents primarily at 2 separate protests at the Whipple Federal Building, one back in January where protesters created a blockade, and another in March that led to the arrest of nearly 40 people. Now, the indictment is largely made up of conversations you would expect to be private, messages shared over encrypted chats, conversations had in private and secure meetings, but it all paints a picture of a group that wasn't satisfied with simply observing what the government was doing, but rather intended to fight back in some way. And several of the charged defendants are self-described anarchists, with one even saying that the burning of the 3rd police precinct in Minneapolis was one of the happiest days of their life. And several Minneapolis city councilors are already pushing back against what's happening today, putting in a statement, quote, "This is an act of political repression meant to intimidate and terrorize the same people who have been caring for our neighbors and keeping our communities safe from violent immigration agents." They go on to say they condemn these attacks on their neighbors and call on elected officials at every level to do the same. Now, Frank, in court today, federal prosecutors argued for the detention of those who were arrested while this case plays out. And it ended up that they were released on the conditions of no longer protesting on federal property or having any sort of communication with one another. But Frank, again, it's been a heated moment, or heated setting here outside the federal courthouse at times. We'll have continuing coverage here through the 6 o'clock hour.
All right, glad you're there, Adam. Thanks for the update. As federal prosecutors announced those charges this morning, a group of protesters also gathered outside of the federal courthouse in Minneapolis. Esme Murphy was there, and she joins us with new details on those charges. Esme?
Well, Frank, in general, the acts detailed in that indictment involve mostly planning and talking about potential violence. The actual charges are conspiracy to impede or injure a federal officer, solicitation to commit a crime of violence, interstate threats, interstate stalking, assault on a federal officer, and destruction of government property.
These defendants have been charged not for what they said, but for what they did.
The U.S. Attorney played a social media post in which one of the protesters, Kyle Wagner, who is charged, is wearing a bulletproof vest and talking about abandoning peaceful protests.
No, not talking about peaceful protests anymore. We're not talking about having polite conversations anymore. There's nothing fun to chant about it. Get your guns and stop these people.
The U.S. Attorney came back to that line.
We're not talking about peaceful protests. His words, not mine.
Some of the incidents detailed in the 94-page indictment happened on March 1st. The U.S. Attorney says the goal of these protests were violent in nature.
They all joined an agreement, a conspiracy, to interfere with lawful immigration enforcement operations. The conspiracy was not to interfere by their voice, but to do it by force.
Show me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like!
But outside the courthouse, activists like Nikema Levy-Armstrong and Minneapolis Councilmember Jason Chavez blasted prosecutors, saying protesters were being charged for speech that is protected by the Constitution.
And now the government is using its power, its unjustified power that's illegitimate, to try and persecute the people who they were able to identify who were most involved in organizing the resistance.
Now, this is not the first time prosecutors have charged protesters tied to Operation Metro Surge. Some of those charges have been dismissed for lack of evidence. The U.S. Attorney is linking these latest charges to the assassin behind the deadly attacks on Minnesota lawmakers 1 year ago. I'll explain that coming up at 6.
Yeah, we're curious about that as well. All right, Esme, thanks for the update.